The Titanic is not just a romantic movie, and it may not have been just a tragic accident in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. For more than a century, the sinking of the Titanic has been framed as a story of human arrogance, technological overconfidence, and fatal miscalculation. An unsinkable ship, a calm sea, a hidden iceberg, one mistake that cost more than 1,500 lives. That is the official version of history. But history is rarely that simple. For many researchers, economists, and alternative historians, the Titanic represents something far more significant than a maritime disaster. It represents power, money, influence, and a turning point in global financial history. According to this interpretation, the Titanic was not just a ship that sank, it was an event that removed specific individuals at a critical moment, clearing the path for a new financial system that would shape the modern world. This theory does not deny the tragedy. It does not claim that thousands of innocent lives were intentionally sacrificed. Instead, it raises a darker and more uncomfortable question. Who benefited from the sinking of the Titanic, and what changed immediately afterward? To explore this idea, we must first strip away the romantic narrative that has surrounded the Titanic for decades. Forget Jack, forget Rose, forget the orchestral music and cinematic heroism. Those images belong to Hollywood. What remains underneath is a real ship, real passengers, real money, and very real consequences. According to this alternative historical narrative, the Titanic did not sink randomly. It sank at the perfect moment in history, carrying the perfect combination of passengers. The victims were not chosen by class or nationality, but by influence. The target, according to this theory, was never the workers in third class, the immigrants seeking opportunity, or the crew doing their jobs. The target was precise. 3 men. 3 of the wealthiest and most powerful men alive in 1912. Men whose combined economic and political influence was strong enough to interfere with a financial transformation that was being planned quietly, far from public debate. Their names were John Jacob Astor IV, Isidor Straus, and Benjamin Guggenheim. To understand why these men matter, we must step back into a world very different from our own, a world without central banks dominating global finance, a world where governments were not permanently indebted, a world where money itself was unstable, contested, and deeply political. At the beginning of the 20th century, the United States was expanding at an extraordinary pace. Industrialization was accelerating rapidly. Railroads crossed the nation. Steel built cities upward. Oil fueled machines and transportation. Electricity reshaped daily life. Immigration supplied massive labor and ambition. America was transforming into an economic giant. But beneath this explosive growth was a fragile financial system. The United States did not have a central bank. There was no Federal Reserve. There was no unified authority controlling the money supply, interest rates, or credit. Instead, money was largely controlled by private banks and powerful financial houses, many operating with extreme leverage and minimal oversight. This system produced chaos. When confidence collapsed, everything collapsed. These collapses were known as financial panics, and they were devastating. The Panic of 1873 wiped out railroads and banks across the country. The Panic of 1893 triggered mass unemployment and social unrest. The Panic of 1907 nearly destroyed the American financial system entirely. Each panic followed the same pattern. Markets crashed overnight. Banks shut their doors. Businesses failed without warning. Workers lost their jobs. Families lost their life savings. Trust vanished. But while ordinary people suffered, the largest financial institutions often emerged stronger than before. During panic, assets became cheap. Entire companies, railroads, land, and industries were purchased for fractions of their true value. Competition disappeared. Power consolidated upward. Financial crises were not disasters. They were opportunities. After the panic of 1907, the situation reached a breaking point. The economy had come dangerously close to total collapse. Fear spread even among the most powerful bankers. Once again, one man stepped in to stabilize the system. That man was J.P. Morgan. Morgan was not simply a banker, he was the backbone of American finance. When panic spread, Morgan summoned other bankers into private rooms and dictated solutions. He decided which banks would be saved and which would be allowed to fail. Governments deferred to him, markets depended on his decisions. This moment revealed something deeply unsettling. A private individual held more power over the economy than elected officials. For the financial elite, this reality could not continue in such a chaotic form. Not because Morgan had too much power, but because the system itself was unstable and unpredictable. They wanted permanence, structure, control. Out of this fear emerged the idea of a permanent central bank for the United States, an institution that could issue currency, regulate credit, control interest rates, and act as lender of last resort. Publicly, it was presented as protection against future crises. Privately, it represented consolidation of financial authority. The real debate was never whether a central bank should exist. The real debate was who would control it. Would it be a truly public institution, accountable to voters and elected representatives, or would it be influenced by private banking interests operating beyond democratic oversight? This debate divided the nation. Many politicians, industrialists, and wealthy families opposed a privately influenced central bank. They feared it would place unelected bankers above governments, allowing them to control nations through bet, credit, and monetary policy. This is where Astor, Straus, and Guggenheim enter the story. John Jacob Astor IV was not just rich, he was the richest man in the world. His fortune came from real estate, hotels, and generations of inherited power. He funded major projects, influenced political decisions, and understood economics deeply. Astor was not opposed to financial stability, but he was deeply wary of centralized monetary power dominated by private interests. Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's, was more than a businessman. He was a former congressman, deeply involved in public service. He understood how financial systems affected ordinary citizens and believed that economic power should be accountable. Benjamin Guggenheim represented industrial power at its peak. Mining, metals, infrastructure, the physical backbone of modern civilization. His wealth gave him influence far beyond business and access to the highest levels of power. According to this theory, these men were obstacles, not conspirators, not revolutionaries, but influential figures whose opposition mattered. There is no document proving coordinated resistance, no signed declaration, but power does not always leave paper trails. Sometimes resistance is silent, and sometimes obstacles disappear. Now we arrive at the ship. The Titanic was not simply a ship, it was a statement, a floating declaration of dominance, wealth, and industrial confidence. At the beginning of the 20th century, ships were not just transportation, they were symbols of power, and the Titanic was designed to be the ultimate symbol. It was the largest moving object ever built by human hands, more luxurious than any hotel on land, more technologically advanced than any vessel before it. Everything about the Titanic was meant to communicate one message to the world. Human progress had reached a level where nature itself could be controlled. Behind this project stood enormous financial interests. The company that owned the Titanic was part of a massive shipping empire, deeply connected to the most powerful banking networks of the time. And at the center of those networks stood J.P. Morgan. John Pierpont Morgan was not merely a wealthy banker, he was the architect of modern American finance. His influence extended into railroads, steel, shipping, electricity, and international banking. When markets trembled, Morgan did not ask governments what to do. Governments waited to see what Morgan would decide. Morgan was directly connected to the Titanic. He had a private suite prepared for him. His presence on the maiden voyage was expected. Newspapers mentioned it. His participation would have added prestige and legitimacy to the ship. And yet, just days before departure, Morgan canceled his trip. There was no confirmed medical emergency, no documented family crisis, no urgent business obligation officially recorded. He simply chose not to board. This detail has troubled researchers for decades, not because wealthy men never change plans, but because of the timing, because of who did board instead, and because of what followed. John Jacob Astor IV boarded the Titanic with his pregnant wife. Isidor Straus boarded with his wife Ida. Benjamin Guggenheim boarded as well. 3 men of extraordinary wealth and influence, all present on the same ship at the same historical moment. The Titanic left Southampton carrying more than 2,000 passengers and crew, but from the moment it departed, it carried a silent weakness that would soon become fatal. There were not enough lifeboats. This was not a secret, it was not a mistake, it was a decision. Maritime regulations at the time were outdated and based on tonnage rather than passenger capacity. The Titanic technically complied with the law, but compliance did not equal safety. Extra lifeboats would have taken up deck space, they would have disrupted the visual symmetry of luxury, they would have reminded passengers that danger was possible. Confidence was part of the product being sold, and lifeboats interfered with that illusion. Safety was sacrificed for appearance. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, the damage was not immediately obvious. The ship did not explode, it did not tip sharply, it continued sailing for a time. This delay created confusion and disbelief. Crew members hesitated to sound alarms, passengers resisted evacuation orders. Many believed the ship was truly unsinkable. Lifeboats were launched half-empty. Critical minutes were lost. Class divisions made everything worse. Passengers in first class hesitated because wealth insulated them from fear. Passengers in third class were delayed by locked gates, language barriers, and confusion. The evacuation process was chaotic and deeply unequal. As the reality of the situation became undeniable, individual choices revealed character. John Jacob Astor was last seen helping women and children before being overtaken by the freezing Atlantic. Isidor Straus refused a lifeboat while others remained behind, choosing to stay with his wife until the end. Benjamin Guggenheim dressed in formal evening wear and calmly prepared to die with dignity. In a single night, 3 men who held immense economic and political power vanished beneath the ocean. The Titanic sank. The world mourned. Newspapers filled with stories of heroism and tragedy. But while the public focused on loss, something else happened quietly. Opposition disappeared. The debate around central banking lost some of its most influential voices. Public attention shifted. Emotional shock replaced political resistance, and soon after that, history moved forward. In 1913, the Federal Reserve System was created. The creation of the Federal Reserve did not happen in open public debate. It followed secretive meetings, including the infamous Jekyll Island gathering, where powerful bankers and politicians met in private to design the structure of the new system. The plan was written in secrecy, away from voters, journalists, and public scrutiny. Officially, the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the economy, prevent future panics, and protect the public from financial collapse. And in some ways, it succeeded. But critics saw something far more dangerous. They saw the permanent centralization of monetary power, a system where money was created as debt, where interest became a permanent obligation, where governments no longer controlled their own currency but borrowed it into existence. They saw the birth of a system that allowed unelected financial institutions to influence nations, markets, wars, and political outcomes. To these critics, this moment marked the beginning of modern financial servitude. It is important to be intellectually honest. There is no definitive proof that the Titanic was sabotaged. Mainstream historians attribute the disaster to human error, design flaws, excessive speed, and overconfidence. There is no signed document proving that Astor, Straus, and Guggenheim coordinated political opposition to the Federal Reserve. But history is not shaped only by written proof. It is shaped by patterns, by timing, by outcomes, by who benefits and who disappears. A ship sank. 3 powerful men died. A new financial system emerged shortly afterwards. Coincidence does not mean impossibility, but coincidence repeated enough times becomes a question. The Titanic rests at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, broken in two, slowly decaying in darkness. It is often described as a grave, but symbolically it may also be a foundation, the foundation of a financial system that still governs the modern world. Money built the ship, money surrounded the ship, money survived the ship, and in the world of money and power, nothing truly sinks. If stories about hidden power, money, and history interest you, this is the moment to pause. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. These stories are uncomfortable, controversial, and often buried, but they only survive if people choose to hear them. Because this story does not end with the Titanic. The same families, the same banking interests, the same patterns of crisis and consolidation. And the next chapter involves a family tied directly to the White House, to wars, to intelligence agencies, and to decisions made far from public view. Because in the world of money and power, nothing happens by accident.